might look like. And that concludes this presentation, and we are ready for any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate it. Other questions?
Sure. Several. Is Russell Klaus here?
Russell's at a planning conference in Chicago.
Is anyone from the planning department here? Or?
There are several people from the planning department that are at it's the American Planning Association meeting in Chicago, so there's no one here today to discuss this particular item.
Okay, well, that's unfortunate. But I guess what I want to touch on is maybe, I mean, the discussion has focused on COPTA and our transit agency, but I want to talk just for a second about how planning might improve our transit system and how coordination between planning and transit really doesn't seem to have been on our radar, or Public Works for that matter, I mean, in terms of our streetscapes and things like that. And some examples might be the Mary Mahoney Center, the new Oklahoma City County Health Department is building a new facility which is designed to try and impact public health outcomes in the 73111 zip code, which has the worst health outcomes. But they built a facility where there's no transit service. And now we're learning that there's going to be a new Social Security facility built on 122nd and Kelly, where there's no transit service. And so it seems that one thing we're asking our transit agency to do is chase poor planning and poor design. Whereas if we had a lot of these facilities, which we know would need to be integrated with transit, preferably on what looks like a straight line, then it would greatly simplify and improve efficiencies of our transit system. So I guess let me just ask Rick, since planning is not.
I should mention, I would be remiss to not mention that the Transportation and Parking Department does have a planning staff. Larry Hopper is here from that department, and he does work on the planning aspect of the transit system.
Right. What I'm looking for is for everyone to get on the same page. Developers, architects, planners, transit officials, everyone. In our neighborhood conservation committee, when we're looking at what federal funds, what housing projects, what development projects, for transit always to be part of the conversation, for transit to always be a variable. Which senior housing development should we fund? Well, which one is on a transit line should be one of the variables. I guess that's really the point. And I don't see, certainly in the neighborhood conservation committee, and I don't see that as part of the discussion, and I'm hoping that we all can get on the same page there. In terms of the Social Security Administration facility, for example, it's on 23rd right now. It's on a high. We have great transit service on 23rd. It's one of our best lines. So my understanding is what Social Security puts out an RFP that says they want to build a new facility, and that it should have transit access. Is that an accurate statement?
As far as I know, that's true. That one of the requirements in the RFP was that public transportation service would be available at whatever location they end up choosing.
So a developer owns land on 122nd and Kelly, and he answers the RFP, and then what happens? Does he contact us?
Yeah, in this specific instance, he contacted us and said he would like to get transit service up there. Obviously, we're 2 miles away just to get to that point, and then 2 miles back to get onto the regular route. So it then becomes an issue of who pays for that service. Our response is that he needs to look at that as being a cost of the development, and that he would need to contribute money to the service. Now, that's one of the issues to try to cover costs. The other challenge that we have in a situation like this is the impact that has on that route itself, the running time of that route. He talked about clock face, or he talked about this regular arrivals at the transit center. When you start expanding routes, then that starts impacting that, and most often in a negative way. it also impacts its connections with other routes in the system. So there's a dollars and cents discussion that needs to take place, but then there's also this discussion about its impact on the system in total. So, I mean, those are challenges that we have. Otherwise, the developer comes and goes to the specific council person who represents them and says, I need some help, I need some money. I mean, that would be the typical way it would work.
And what would, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What would you estimate the cost to divert 2 miles to 122nd and Kelly?
But we did the work on this one. We know it's in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $300,000.
So do we,
and that is to provide what we would assume to be regular service. I mean, again, you have options. If you want to reduce the cost, you're not as frequent to a location. So you make 3 trips a day instead of 7 or 8 trips a day. Then it becomes a question of what's practical in terms of delivering a quality service to a destination.
so is there a mechanism? My understanding is now that Social Security has a contract with this developer to move it to 122nd and Kelly. Is there a mechanism for us to communicate with county, state, or federal agencies to say, you know, you're considering putting on 122nd and Kelly, we want you to understand there's no transit service there.
Well, let's
Your RFP asked for transit service, and we want you to understand that without a $300,000 a year subsidy from the Oklahoma City taxpayers, there is no transit service to that proposed location.
Well, I'm sure that has been made them aware of that situation. I think the challenge that we have is just the general awareness. I mean, we're having more discussion about transit today than we were 6 years ago. And I think increasing the awareness and really coming to the table is part of the challenge. You know, a private developer, we can't control what they do or where they go if they want to build a facility. Hopefully the awareness of the need for public transportation and the discussion that's taking place opens up some eyes about that consideration. We certainly would work with the planning department if they're made aware of some of these issues, and I question whether they're always aware.
I would like to say that the GSA is required to notify the city when they are relocating a facility like this. They send a letter to the city manager's office. He always refers those to the planning department, who prepares a response. Their general response is in direct response to that question about the availability of services. We always recommend that they relocate whatever facility they're relocating within the core area so that they can retain the services that are available in those areas.
And have done so for many years.
Many years. And have actually, in the last 5 years, become much more clear in our response about the implications of moving outside of that service area. Once they receive that, we do not know what their response is to that. Sometimes we're unaware of what relocation activities they'll take until it's actually announced. So the planning department is involved in that response.
Okay. So do you think what's playing out is they're just looking for inexpensive land, and then that's how, or that's just...
They have the same budget issues we have. A lot of them are financially driven decisions.
Okay.
I have to agree that the different city county health department, one way them moving to 63rd was a good deal. But another way, they did very poor planning when it comes to public transportation. Here it is, they use 73111 zip code to build this facility. But however, they did not place it in the areas that needed the most. So city county health department and other entities have to do a better job when it comes to putting their facilities where it is needed the most. And so we look at the Social Security Administration, again, transportation. And him and I actually met last week. That was one of the deals that we talked about, was how much was it going to cost to put a line there. And I actually had a conversation with the developer yesterday in regards to the public transportation. To me, if you are a government entity, you should look first at where the need needs to be. Also, you need to look at the public transportation. So here we are facing a dilemma of should the city pay for this bus line? Because $300,000 is a lot of money. And as we look at this study as well, the routes that may be eliminated is in Ward 7, the Green Pastures area. That's going to be a tough call. I'm just going to let you know, because that's the only, to some of those people out there, that's the only way they have to come into Oklahoma City. They pay taxes dollars like everybody else. So we're going to have to be creative and maybe we have to do a smaller bus to that area or a van. But some type of public transportation has to be out there, because for some of those people out there, that's it. But again, in regards to Social Security Administration and City County Health Department, they have to do a better job when it comes to building new facilities. I think one of the first conversations they need to look at and have is public transportation. If you're talking about improving health, you need to again look at the areas that need it the most. And again, their new location is within the 7311, but it's not in the neighborhood that need it the most.
I just want to pick up on what another big picture issue, and John talked about that people in those neighborhoods pay taxes like everybody else. But the fact is that Oklahoma is the only state in America that does not allow its cities to access property tax or income tax. So if they're paying property tax or income tax, none of that is going towards operations and maintenance of a bus system. We are disproportionately very dependent on sales tax. So if you live in an area and you look around and there's not retail, enough commercial activity that's generating sales tax, then your transit line is being heavily, heavily subsidized to go to that area, because none of your property tax in this state is going to the city of Oklahoma City for its general fund. How many cities in America with more than 500,000 people in those cities do not have a dedicated funding source for transit?
I can't answer that off the top of my head, but I can say that most do, but there are ones that do not.
Can you...
Tim?
I don't know the number, actually. But I agree with Thomas. There are some that most do, but there are still some that do not.
My understanding, I thought from some of our previous discussions, with Oklahoma City and Tulsa were the only two cities with more than 500,000 people that did not have a dedicated funding source for transit. Certainly, almost all cities that size would have a regional transit authority and a dedicated funding source.
That's what's common. But I can't say with certainty that, like a city like Arlington, Texas, that has no transit system virtually at all, other than some more informal system, I believe that over 500,000, they have, not only do they not have dedicated funding, they don't have any transit either. They're commonly known as the largest system in the largest city in America that does not have a transit system.
So how about if we wait for, of cities that have a transit system that have more than 500,000, the large supermajority would have a dedicated funding source for transit?
That's correct.
Okay. So,
Very large supermajority. I would say, without having the numbers in front of me, I would hazard a guess that we're talking about plus 85%. I will say, however, that many of those are served by a separate transit authority that has taxing authority that's separate from the city. Lots of times that is created by virtue of creating a special tax. A special authority is also then created to oversee the expenditure of that tax. So instead of it being a city function, it becomes this more regional or non-city function. That's quite common.
so it's a unique funding situation. You can't draw corollaries from other regional cities or even national cities, because you don't have a regional transit authority, you don't have a dedicated funding source, and you have no access to property tax.
But at the same time, let's take a city like Colorado